when your silence becomes the disruption they cannot control. There is a moment in every survivor's journey when the story shifts. And it doesn't shift because the narcissist changed, it shifts because you did. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in a quiet, internal way that they cannot predict or control. Your silence, the very thing they once believed was submission, becomes something else entirely. The collapse of the emotional structure they built inside you. A narcissist doesn't fear losing a relationship. A narcissist fears losing access. To them, connection has never been mutual. It has always been transactional. They provide confusion, intensity, intermittent affection, and in return, you provide emotional response. You react, you explain, you defend yourself, you try to stabilize the storm they create. Your reactions were the emotional currency that kept their identity inflated. So when you stop reacting, even if you say nothing, block nothing, confront nothing, your silence becomes a psychological disturbance they did not anticipate. A woman once told me, "He didn't panic when I walked away. He panicked when I stopped responding." And that sentence reveals the truth most survivors never fully see. Your absence doesn't threaten them. Your indifference does. Because indifference is not an emotional game. Indifference is emotional starvation for them. Narcissists live through emotional feedback. It doesn't matter if the feedback is positive or negative. Admiration feeds them. Anger feeds them. Fear feeds them. Confusion feeds them. Silence, true silence, suffocates them. And here is why they return. When you withdraw your reactions, you interrupt their entire internal system. The narcissistic ego is a fragile machine that must be constantly maintained by external response. Without you responding, they begin to feel something they spend their entire lives avoiding. Their own emptiness. This emptiness is not sadness. It is not heartbreak. It is not loneliness. It is a collapse of identity. Your silence forces them to face the one truth they cannot handle. Without emotional control over you, they have no internal stability. This is why your silence makes them reappear, not because they love you, not because they realized your value, but because they cannot regulate themselves without access to your emotional world. Your silence is not rejection. Your silence is revelation. It reveals who they are without your reactions. And they cannot survive that exposure. In the next part, you'll see what happens inside a narcissist, psychologically, the moment they realize they no longer control your emotional responses, and why this loss of control triggers their most strategic behaviors. What happens inside a narcissist when they lose your emotional response? When a narcissist realizes that your emotional energy is no longer accessible to them, they don't simply feel offended or rejected. Something far more primitive and destabilizing is triggered inside them. Your silence doesn't create sadness. It creates fragmentation, a psychological unraveling they spend their entire lives trying to avoid. A narcissist does not have a stable inner world. They do not self-soothe. They do not emotionally regulate. They do not generate identity from within. Their entire sense of self is external, floating, fragile, dependent on mirrors they control. And you were one of those mirrors. So when your reactions disappear, the narcissist doesn't think, "She moved on." They think, "Who am I now?" Because your emotional responses didn't just feed their ego, they defined it. You were not simply a partner. You were an external stabilizer, keeping their inner emptiness from rising to the surface. A woman once wrote, "When I stopped responding, it was like he fell apart overnight." He didn't fall apart because you left. He fell apart because your silence removed the scaffolding he needed to hold himself together. Here's what begins happening internally, often all at once. 1. Identity disruption. Your silence removes their emotional mirror. They cannot see themselves without you. This creates a profound psychological threat, not of losing love, but of losing self. 2. Ego deflation. Their ego depends on constant reinforcement. Even negative reinforcement still counts as fuel. When nothing comes back, no anger, no panic, no sadness, their ego begins collapsing inward. Narcissists fear irrelevance more than abandonment, and silence makes them irrelevant. 3. Emotional dysregulation. They cannot regulate their own emotions. When your response disappears, their system becomes volatile. Anxiety spikes. Anger rises. Desperation appears. Impulsive thoughts rush in. This is why they often reappear suddenly and intensely. They are trying to stabilize themselves through you. 4. Internal void emerges. This is the part that terrifies them the most. The emptiness they spend their entire lives outrunning finally catches up. Your silence forces them to face the emotional vacuum they've always carried, but instead of confronting it, they do what they've always done. They search for someone to fill it, and that someone is almost always the last person who fed their ego the most. 5. Survival instinct activation. This is not a romantic pull, it is a survival response. Your silence threatens their emotional ecosystem, so they instinctively try to revive the bond, not to reconnect, but to restore control. This explains why their return feels urgent, frantic, or strangely intense. They are not thinking logically, they are scrambling. This is the deep, hidden reason they come back. They are not returning to you, they are returning to themselves through you. In the next part, you'll learn why their return is almost always strategic, and why it happens at the exact moment your nervous system begins to heal. Why the narcissist returns the moment you begin to heal. One of the most painful and confusing parts of breaking free from a narcissist is this. They come back exactly when you finally start feeling like yourself again. Not when you're crying, not when you're desperate, not when you're clinging, but when your nervous system begins to settle. A woman once told me, he always sensed the moment I was getting better. She thought it was intuition. But it wasn't intuition, it was behavioral detection. Narcissists don't read emotions the way healthy people do. They read shifts in access, loss of control, and changes in your emotional availability. They notice microsigns that your attachment is weakening. Because your weakening attachment threatens their emotional survival. Here's the truth most survivors never realize. They don't come back because they miss you. They come back because they feel you leaving them psychologically. Leaving them emotionally is far more threatening to them than leaving them physically. 1. They feel the loss of control before you feel the freedom. Narcissists are hyped to anything that hints they are no longer central in your emotional world. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop defending, stop fearing their silence, they sense the shift instantly. Your emotional energy was once predictable, now it's not. Predictability is control. Unpredictability is panic. 2. Your healing disrupts their internal hierarchy. When you begin to detach, your nervous system stops responding to old triggers. Your body no longer reacts to their tone. Your anxiety no longer spikes at their silence. Your self-worth no longer fluctuates based on their attention. This terrifies them, because their entire connection to you was built on predictable emotional reactions. Your healing breaks the pattern that sustained them. 3. They return to re-establish the emotional contract. The narcissist's return is never random. It is a bid for emotional access. They want to see if they can still influence you, provoke you, destabilize you, or pull you back into the loop. Their goal is not reconciliation. Their goal is reinstatement. They want to reinstall the old version of you, reactive, anxious, self-doubting, emotionally dependent, hyper-tuned to their moods. This is why the first messages they send feel strategic, not emotional. They're not checking on you. They're checking your emotional temperature. 4. Your silence disrupts their emotional supply chain. Narcissists rely on multiple sources of validation, but each source has a different quality. You, the empathic one, the steady one, the one who loved deeply, you were a high-quality supply. When they lose access to you, they feel the loss immediately. It's not love, it's dependency. Your silence creates withdrawal symptoms for them. Not romantic longing, identity instability. 5. Your healing exposes their lack of growth. As you get stronger, calmer, clearer, they feel weaker, emptier, and less relevant. Your progress magnifies their stagnation. You evolve, they do not. And this imbalance triggers their need to pull you back into the dynamic where they felt powerful and you felt unsure. This is why their returns are often timed with your breakthroughs. They don't sense your pain. They sense your autonomy. They don't sense your longing. They sense your liberation. And nothing threatens a narcissist more than someone they once controlled becoming emotionally independent. Here is the real psychological truth. The narcissist doesn't return because you are special to them. They return because your healing makes them irrelevant. And irrelevance is the one thing they cannot emotionally survive. The exact strategies narcissists use to pull you back into the cycle. When a narcissist feels you slipping out of their psychological grip, they don't reflect, grow, or accept reality. They activate a pattern, a predictable, rehearsed, unconscious pattern, designed to pull you back into emotional submission. These tactics are not random. They are survival strategies rooted in fear, ego collapse, and desperation for control. A woman once said, "Every time I got stronger, he suddenly became the version of himself I always wished he had been." This wasn't coincidence. It was calculated emotional retrieval. Here are the core strategies narcissists use when they sense you healing. 1. The perfected return, a manufactured version of the person you fell for. This tactic is the most seductive and the most dangerous. They suddenly become attentive, gentle, emotionally present, nostalgic, expressive, but this version is not growth. It's mimicry, a temporary performance, engineered to reset the cycle. They aren't meeting your emotional needs. They're imitating them. And because it mirrors the beginning of the relationship, your nervous system may feel old patterns activating the longing, the softness, the hope. But remember, the beginning was not connection, it was conditioning. 2. The guilt infusion technique, rewriting the past. When charm doesn't work, they pivot to guilt. Statements like, "I can't believe you gave up so easily. You never understood how much I tried. After everything I did for you, I guess I was the only one who cared." These lines aren't reflections. They're pressure points, emotional levers, designed to activate your empathy, your responsibility wound, your desire to fix things. Guilt is not about the past. It's about regaining control in the present. 3. The panic trigger, sudden emotional urgency. When a narcissist feels true detachment, they create an artificial crisis. Messages like, "We need to talk now. You have no idea what you're causing. This is serious. I can't believe you're doing this to me." Urgency bypasses logic. It activates instinct. And instinct is where they once controlled you most. This tactic is not about communication. It's about 4. The provoked silence, weaponized withdrawal. This tactic is cruel because it is familiar. They disappear intentionally, hoping the old version of you, the one conditioned to fear abandonment, will return in panic, longing, or self-blame. But now something is different. Your silence is real. Theirs is performance. When they don't get the reaction they want, the tactic escalates, not because they've moved on, but because silence no longer manipulates you the way it once did. 5. The identity hook. No one will love you the way I did. This is not sentiment. It's psychological branding. Narcissists try to convince you that your standards are too high, your emotions are too much, your needs are unreasonable, your expectations are impossible. Why? Because if they can distort your belief about what you deserve, they can recreate dependency. But the moment you recognize this pattern, the hook breaks. 6. The projection flip, turning your healing into an attack. Once they see their tactics failing, they accuse you of being cold, being dramatic, being selfish, changing too much. This is not anger. It's panic disguised as superiority. The accusation isn't about you. It's about their loss of influence. Here is the truth so many survivors desperately need to hear. Narcissists don't try to win you back. They try to win back the version of you that needed them. But that version of you is dissolving. Your healing threatens the role you once played, the role that kept the dynamic alive. In the next part, you'll understand why these tactics feel so powerful, even when you intellectually know what's happening, and why your nervous system responds before your mind can interpret the truth. Why their tactics work on your nervous system before your mind understands what's happening. One of the most painful and confusing parts of this cycle is realizing that even when you see the manipulation clearly, a part of you still feels pulled toward them. You recognize the pattern intellectually, yet something inside your body reacts as if you're still living in the relationship. That reaction isn't weakness. It isn't longing. It isn't love. It's conditioning, neurological, hormonal, and deeply somatic. A woman once told me, "My mind knew he was manipulating me, but my body reacted like I still belonged to him." That sentence captures the truth survivors rarely hear. The trauma bond is stored in your nervous system, not in your thoughts. The narcissist's tactics work because they bypass your logic and hit the part of you designed for survival, not reasoning. Let's break down what actually happens in your body. 1. Your brain learned to associate chaos with connection. Because the relationship was built on emotional highs and lows, your system adapted to expect instability. Unpredictability became normal. Intensity became meaningful. So when they resurface, your body recognizes the pattern long before your mind recognizes the danger. This is how trauma bonds override rational thinking. Your body responds to old cues, as if they are still threats or rewards. 2. Intermittent reinforcement wires addiction into your nervous system. Narcissists don't give affection consistently. They give it unpredictably. The pain gives relief, gives pain cycle releases dopamine in bursts, creating a neurological dependency. You weren't addicted to the person. You were addicted to the anticipation of relief. So when they reappear with charm or nostalgia, your brain releases a familiar comfort signal, even when you consciously know it's manipulation. 3. Their silence once activated your abandonment circuitry. Your nervous system learned to fear their withdrawal. It learned to associate silence with danger. So even now, the possibility of their silence returning can trigger old alarms. Alarms rooted in survival, not desire. This is why you may feel anxious when they disappear, even if you don't want them anymore. 4. Their sudden kindness triggers oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Oxytocin doesn't track morality. It doesn't distinguish between healthy and unhealthy attachment. It bonds you to whoever offers emotional relief. So when the narcissist returns with soft words or faux vulnerability, your system may release the same chemicals that once bonded you to them, even if your mind rejects everything they say. 5. Your body mistakes intensity for intimacy. The volatility of the relationship created emotional adrenaline. Your nervous system became accustomed to reacting, anticipating, preparing. Calm feels foreign. Neutrality feels empty. Stability feels suspicious. So when the narcissist reappears with emotional intensity, your body misinterprets it as depth. Not because it is depth, but because your system was trained to equate emotional spikes with connection. 6. Your survival wiring was shaped inside the relationship. Your nervous system learned how to predict danger, how to avoid punishment, how to soothe their moods, how to decode their tone, how to keep yourself emotionally safe. These patterns become automatic. Muscle memory of the heart. That's why, even now, their presence can trigger old survival strategies. Not because you're weak, but because your body hasn't yet learned the world is safe without them. Here is the truth you need to hold on to. Your body is not betraying you. Your body is healing from them. The reaction you feel is not longing. It's residue neurological echoes of a cycle you're already breaking. In the next part, we'll explore the moment when your nervous system begins choosing you instead of the cycle, and why that moment marks the beginning of permanent freedom. When your nervous system finally begins choosing you instead of the cycle, there is a turning point in healing that almost every survivor reaches, long before they recognize it. It doesn't feel powerful at first. It doesn't feel victorious. In fact, it often feels strange, even anticlimactic. It's the moment when your nervous system begins responding to your needs, not to the familiar signals of the narcissistic cycle. A woman once told me, "I still thought about him, but I stopped reacting to those thoughts. They didn't move me the way they used to." That shift, that soft, steady unhooking is the beginning of emotional freedom. Here's the truth. Your mind understands the trauma bond lasts. Your nervous system understands it first. Your body stops responding long before your thoughts catch up. The change begins in tiny, easily overlooked moments. His tone no longer spikes your heart rate. His silence doesn't feel like danger anymore. His messages trigger annoyance, not panic. Your body doesn't lean forward emotionally. It stays still. You pause before reacting, instead of reacting automatically. These are not small steps. These are biological revolutions. For so long, your nervous system believed that your emotional safety depended on reading him, pleasing him, calming him, or preparing for him. Your survival wiring was shaped inside the relationship. But when your nervous system begins choosing you, something extraordinary shifts. 1. Your body stops scanning for his emotional weather. You no longer live in reaction mode. Your vigilance turns inward, not outward. You begin listening to your own signals, instead of anticipating his. This alone weakens the trauma bond. 2. Your baseline anxiety drops, not because he changed, but because you did. The emotional spikes he once caused begin leveling out. Your body is no longer primed for emergency. You feel lighter without understanding why. This is your system exiting survival mode. 3. You stop seeking relief from the person who caused the pain. This is one of the most powerful shifts of all. Before, the narcissist created the wound and the relief, the cycle of psychological dependence. But your nervous system eventually rejects the pattern. It begins looking for comfort in solitude, stillness, breathing, grounding, friendships, your own emotional space. This is healing disguised as simplicity. 4. Emotional neutrality becomes your new normal. You begin noticing that your reaction is not love, it's habit. And the habit is dying. The emotional noise he once triggered becomes background static. You don't detach suddenly. You detach gradually, through 1,000 microscopic corrections. 5. You stop negotiating with memories. Memories lose their emotional charge. You remember what happened, but it doesn't feel like it belongs to the present anymore. This is the nervous system, filing away the trauma. No longer treating it as active threat. 6. Your identity begins resurfacing. Not as confidence. Not as empowerment. But as space, internal space, where you begin to exist again. You stop shaping yourself around his moods. You stop shrinking. You stop bending. You start returning. This is the quiet re-entry into your own life. Here is the most important truth of this entire stage. When your nervous system begins choosing you, the trauma bond is already breaking even if your mind still feels uncertain. Your thoughts may lag behind. Your emotions may fluctuate. Your memories may still hurt. But your body is already walking away. And once the nervous system stops responding to the cycle, the narcissist power collapses at the root. In the next part, we explore the stage every survivor reaches next. The emotional emptiness that appears once the trauma bond weakens. And why that emptiness is not a setback, but the doorway to your identity returning. When the bond breaks and emptiness arrives, why this is not a setback, but a turning point. One of the most misunderstood stages of healing is what happens, right? After your nervous system stops reacting to the narcissist. You expect relief. You expect strength. You expect clarity. But instead, something unsettling appears, a deep, quiet emptiness. A hollow space where the intensity used to be. A woman once wrote, "I wasn't hurting anymore, but I didn't feel like myself either. It felt like standing in a room with the lights off." That feeling is not failure. It is not regression. It is not longing. It is the vacuum left behind when a cycle ends. Here's the truth most survivors don't understand at first. Emptiness isn't missing him. Emptiness is the absence of the chaos you were conditioned to survive. Your nervous system adapted to emotional extremes. It learned to expect tension, conflict, withdrawal, relief, guilt, adrenaline. The cycle was painful, but it was full. Full of noise, full of signals, full of emotional urgency. When the cycle stops, your nervous system doesn't celebrate, and recalibration feels like nothingness at first. 1. Emptiness appears when your body no longer needs to stay in survival mode. For months, maybe years, you lived in constant vigilance. Your nervous system stayed alert, waiting for the next emotional shift. When that demand disappears, the system powers down. That powered down feels like silence, like stillness, like emptiness. But nothing is wrong. Your body is resting for the first time in a long time. 2. Emptiness is your system detoxing from emotional intensity. A trauma bond feeds on emotional spikes. Your body ran on adrenaline, cortisol, dopamine from intermittent affection, oxytocin from temporary relief. When the bond breaks, those chemicals drop. Your body interprets the drop as something is missing. But what's missing is the cycle, not the person. 3. Emptiness is the space where your identity begins to reappear. During the relationship, your emotional world was shaped around their moods, their reactions, their needs, their silence, their approval. When that external focus disappears, you're left with you. But you haven't met this version of yourself in a long time, so she feels like a stranger at first. This strangeness is not a void. It is the beginning of self-reintroduction. 4. Emptiness removes the emotional noise that used to drown out your intuition. For so long, your intuition was muted by fear, tension, confusion, and self-doubt. Now, in the quiet, your intuition begins whispering again. But whispers feel like emptiness when you've lived inside storms. Soon, the whisper gets louder. Soon, it feels like guidance. Soon, it feels like you. 5. Emptiness is emotional detox, not emotional loss. Your body is clearing out the addiction to intensity, the anticipation of harm, the false sense of connection, the fear of abandonment, the emotional reflexes he installed. This stage is uncomfortable, not because you're going backward, but because your system is resetting to a life that doesn't revolve around him. Here is the truth survivors need most. Emptiness is not the return of the pain, it is the return of space. space where your identity will rebuild itself next. In the next part, we'll explore how this emptiness slowly transforms into neutrality, your first real taste of emotional freedom. When emptiness slowly turns into neutrality, the first real sign of freedom. If the emptiness felt unsettling, neutrality will feel unfamiliar, because it's something you haven't experienced in a long time. Emotional balance, without fear. Neutrality is not dramatic, it's not euphoric, it's not triumphant. It arrives quietly, like a soft morning light entering a room that has been dark for too long. A woman once told me, "One day, I realized I hadn't thought about him at all. Not because I was avoiding him, but because my mind simply didn't go there." This is neutrality, not indifference, not numbness, not denial, just absence of emotional charge. Here's the truth. Neutrality is the opposite of reactivity, not the opposite of love. For so long, your nervous system reacted automatically to everything related to him: his texts, his silence, his tone, his sudden affection, his withdrawal, his unpredictability. Your body was conditioned to respond to his emotional gravity. But when the trauma bond weakens and emptiness fades, your system it stops anticipating danger. It stops scanning for his reactions. It stops interpreting every signal as threat. And suddenly, you just don't respond. Not because you're being strong, but because your system is no longer hooked. 1. Neutrality is when his name stops triggering a physical reaction. Your heart doesn't speed up. Your stomach doesn't drop. Your body doesn't brace itself. This is not healing finally working. This is healing deeply integrating. 2. Neutrality is when his silence stops feeling like punishment. Before, silence meant abandonment, danger, or instability. Now, silence simply means nothing. It's just silence. It no longer dictates your emotional climate. This is emotional liberation. 3. Neutrality is when memories lose their authority. The memories may still exist, but they no longer command your reactions. They are no longer active stories, just archived chapters. You stop negotiating with the past. You stop replaying old conversations. You stop trying to decode what went wrong. You finally accept that the story has ended. 4. Neutrality is when your body recognizes safety without asking permission. Healing isn't about thinking differently. It's about your nervous system learning that the danger is gone. You stop feeling urgency, panic, vigilance, emotional dependency. You finally breathe without bracing for impact. 5. Neutrality is when you no longer respond to manipulation attempts. If he returns with sweetness, guilt, anger, nostalgia, silence, your body stays calm. Your decisions stay yours. Your emotions remain regulated. This is the stage narcissists cannot penetrate, because you are no longer supplying the energy they once fed on. 5. Neutrality is when you no longer respond to manipulation attempts. If he returns with sweetness, guilt, anger, nostalgia, silence, your body stays calm. Your decisions stay yours. Your emotions remain regulated. This is the stage narcissists cannot penetrate, because you are no longer supplying the energy they once fed on. 6. Neutrality doesn't feel like power, it feels like quiet. And because you're used to confusion, chaos, intensity, and emotional spikes, quiet feels strange at first. But quiet is the new beginning. Quiet is where your identity regrows. Quiet is what freedom sounds like internally. Here is the truth. Neutrality is the emotional immunity the narcissist feared you would find. Because neutrality means they can no longer control your responses. In the next part, we explore what begins rising inside you as neutrality settles your identity, your sense of self, your intuition, your emotional autonomy, and why this stage marks the true beginning of your new life. When your identity begins to return after the bond breaks, when neutrality settles, something profound begins to happen, quietly, gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. You don't feel stronger. You don't feel over it. You don't feel triumphant. Instead, you feel something else. Space. Space where fear used to be. Space where chaos used to live. Space where your identity, long suffocated, begins to awaken again. A woman once told me, "My identity didn't come back like a breakthrough, it came back like remembering a song I used to love." That is exactly how identity returns. Not suddenly, but softly. You spent so long shaping yourself around the emotional climate of someone unpredictable that you forgot what it felt like to exist without hypervigilance. Your nervous system was calibrated to their needs, their reactions, their silence, their approval. That calibration became your personality, or so you thought. But when the trauma bond dissolves and neutrality emerges, the real you, the one who existed before the cycle, begins resurfacing. 1. You begin rediscovering your own preferences. Not the preferences that kept the peace. Not the preferences shaped by fear. But the authentic ones. The ones you abandoned because the relationship required emotional shrinking. You start asking yourself, what do I enjoy? What feels peaceful to me? What do I value? These questions feel new because the person asking them is new. 2. Your intuition returns stronger than before. During the relationship, your intuition was overridden by self-doubt and manipulation. But now, in the quiet, your intuition rises again, not as a whisper, but as guidance. It feels like clarity. It feels like truth. It feels like home. Intuition is identity speaking. 3. You stop viewing yourself through his eyes. You are no longer measured by his approval, his withdrawal, his criticism, his shifting moods. Your worth stops being externalized. You begin seeing yourself from within, and the image is far more stable. 4. You regain emotional autonomy. Your feelings no longer depend on his presence or absence. Your days no longer revolve around decoding signs. Your peace no longer requires his behavior to stay regulated. This is the return of internal authority. Something the narcissist hoped you would never reclaim. 5. You begin trusting yourself again. You stopped trusting your judgment because he taught you that your emotions were and your perceptions were wrong. Now, slowly, you begin believing your own eyes again. Your internal narrative resets. Your self-concept strengthens. This is identity rebuilding itself from the inside out. 6. The past stops defining the present. The memories lose their emotional charge. The story stops replaying itself. The grip weakens. Not because you forgot what happened, but because you no longer live inside the emotional logic of the relationship. This is the beginning of real freedom. Here is the truth survivors need most. The return of your identity is not a reward. It is the restoration of what was never truly lost. You were not destroyed. You were disconnected. You were not broken. You were overwhelmed. You were not weak. You were surviving. And now, for the first time in a long time, you are living again. In the final part, we'll bring this full circle, showing how your identity solidifies into emotional independence, and why the narcissist can no longer access the world. Freedom begins the moment your story is no longer about him. There comes a moment in this journey when everything quietly shifts, not in a dramatic release, not in a triumphant declaration, but in a calm recognition. You are no longer living inside the emotional architecture he built around you. A woman once told me, one day I realized that thinking about him felt like remembering a different lifetime, one I wasn't living in anymore. That is what real freedom sounds like. Not loud, not explosive, just distant. When your identity returns, something else dissolves. The emotional relevance he once had. His words no longer define you. His silence no longer threatens you. His reappearances no longer destabilize you. His presence no longer dictates the rhythm of your nervous system. And this is the part narcissists fear most. Not that you hate them, not that you block them, not even that you move on, but that you become emotionally unavailable in a way they cannot reverse. You stop participating in the dance. You stop feeding the cycle. You stop offering reactions. You stop offering energy. And the narcissist cannot survive in a story where they have no emotional influence. 1. Freedom is not forgetting him, it's remembering yourself. For so long, you existed as a reaction. Your emotions were shaped around his instability. Your self-worth twisted itself to fit the needs of the relationship. But freedom is when your internal world expands again. When you no longer shrink to accommodate someone else's chaos. When your voice feels like your own. When peace feels normal, instead of suspicious. 2. Freedom is emotional independence, not emotional numbness. You don't stop feeling. You just stop being controlled. Your emotional landscape becomes self-regulated, instead of externally dictated. You can feel sadness without collapsing, loneliness without returning, memories without being pulled back into the story. This is the maturity of healing. Feeling without losing yourself. 3. Freedom is the collapse of the trauma bond's illusion. The relationship once felt irreplaceable, because the cycle was designed to feel irreplaceable. But when the bond dissolves, you see the truth clearly. What felt like love was survival. What felt like depth was what felt like passion was anxiety. What felt like destiny was conditioning. Seeing this doesn't create anger. It creates neutrality. A neutrality that protects you more than any boundary ever could. If this chapter felt like a mirror for your own healing, stay with me. In the next video, we'll explore why narcissists come back when you finally move on, and why their return no longer has power over you. Your healing is not loud. Your healing is steady. Your healing is yours.